Ben, welcome.
Moritz, how are
Yeah,
you?
no, thanks for coming. Good to have you here.
You're welcome. Thank you. Good
Yeah.
to see you.
It's been 2 years, I think, since we last spoke.
Yeah, time flies, doesn't it?
Time flies,
Yeah.
time does fly. Yeah.
Yeah.
No. You are the head of Aqua Marketing Global?
Exactly.
Yes.
The title has changed slightly, but the responsibilities stay the same. So my
Yeah.
official role is now head of strategic marketing and business development.
Okay.
But basically, that again, very similar as before, kind of working on the operational marketing side, which is kind of the advertising and the kind of marketing campaigns you see, but also thinking about the strategic marketing, not just what do we want to do this year and next year in 2026, but what is our 5-year plan, what is our pipeline of products coming through, and of course the business development side, I think speaks for itself.
Yeah, I heard from some of your colleagues that have been at Biomin and now at dsm-firmenich with you over the long haul that you actually started in the lab. You were one of the lab coats.
Yeah.
So,
I did my PhD, so I joined Biomin in 2016. I joined with a very, very technical head actually, and very focused on the science, the technical details. And now really had the pleasure to kind of learn the other side of the business, which is a bit more on the kind of commercial side and the marketing side. And of course, when it comes to DSM, it's all complementary, right? It's about the science, but it's also about the commercial side and the marketing strategy as well. So I think absolutely these kind of skill sets are complementary actually.
So what's new at DSM over the last 2 years? How has the market developed? What are you hearing?
Oh wow, we've been very busy actually. So you can imagine DSM, we have a big portfolio, right? So if I start firstly on the essential products, we've actually celebrating this year our 40th anniversary of Carafill Pink. So the first version was launched in 1985, 40 years ago, which I think is quite incredible actually when you think the aquaculture industry isn't so old actually. It's only about 50, 60 years old maybe. Back then, there was 8 million tons of seafood produced in aquaculture. Now, fast forward 40 years later, it's 80 million tons. So 40 years, the industry has scaled up tenfold. And of course, Carafill Pink has played a really key part of that, helping the industry become what it is today, especially on the salmon side. But what we're seeing more and more is pigmentation in shrimp also becoming more and more important, especially in those markets in Asia, like Hong Kong, in China, those markets which are willing to pay a premium, or to Japan, for these highly pigmented shrimp. So that's what's been going on in the essential part of the business. But of course, a big part of the business now, and where we spend a lot of our time, a lot of our resources, our budgets, is in the additive side of the business. So we've been working hard to develop our value proposition for phytogenics, for example. So we've just finished a trial in Stirling University looking at essential oils against sea lice. So of course, this is the single biggest problem in salmon. And we've managed to obtain a 68% reduction in sea lice attachment with one of our phytogenic products. So again, extremely exciting. And now it's our opportunity to roll that out to our customers and see how that will perform on the field. Not just in terms of reducing the attachment, but of course, if you use it across the cycle, maybe there's the opportunity to reduce the treatments, which of course is causing a lot of problems in themselves. So that's part of the portfolio. And then we were lucky enough, maybe 1 or 2 years ago, to acquire this company called Adair Biome. So Adair came in with a postbiotic. Actually, it was being used in infant formula initially for human nutrition, but we did have some sales in aquaculture and swine. So the last couple of years, or the last 18 months, we've also been running some trials in shrimp with this postbiotic. And again, we have a really good data set now for against white spot, for example, against apand. And excitingly, we're going to launch this product in India in November in the WAS event in Hyderabad. So that's some of the things we've been up to. Of course, it's a very, very extensive list, but these are some of the key things we look back on and with good memories.
Mm-hmm. So these are the things that address some of the core issues that are out there right now that people have asked for in the past. You went through the development. You've got them right now. You're very much in touch with the customer. You see a lot of the customers quite regularly. You talk to them quite regularly across species, across geographies. What are the issues right now that you're starting to pick up, what you're passing back to the lab and saying, these are the things we have to start working on?
Well, like you said, innovation never stands still, right? So since we talked a couple of years ago, the macroeconomic situation has changed a little bit. I think when we last talked, the raw material ingredient prices were super high. The priority of the customers was just cutting costs. So it was all about using enzymes, for example, to reduce your costs. Happily now, that situation has fixed itself, although it's very volatile, of course. But what we're seeing now is actually more and more customers asking about health and welfare. So these kind of nice to have additives, which in the past were kind of excluded from the formula because of this cost limitation. But now, because the prices are a little bit better, the shrimp prices are a little bit better, there's a little bit more room to play with when it comes to the margins. So again, people are talking about now health and welfare. And of course, when it comes to Asia, there's a new disease on the scene, this TPD, translucent post-larvae disease. So again, this is all kind of coming together and saying, look, we need to address this health and welfare challenge together. And like I say, when it comes to finfish, there's always things to fix when it comes to salmon, for example. So I really think it's really on the agenda. And not just in terms of gut health, of course, we have our gut health portfolio, but something we're also noticing in salmon especially, a lot of people now are talking about skin health, about gill health. So now we're trying to come up with a strategy not just about the gut, but more about the mucosal health as a whole, right? Because a kind of a health and a welfare strategy is only as strong as the weakest link. So we have to make sure we bringing innovations forward for each of these key parts.
What do you think brought about that focus on fish welfare, on animal health, in salmon specifically?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. For example, when you look at the sea lice issue, the sea lice in itself is not a big problem for the fish. Of course, there's legal requirements you have to treat, but it's the treatment itself which is causing a lot of those challenges, like for the skin, for example. So whatever treatment you're using, whether it's with the temperature, whether it's with a brushing or something like this, it's extremely stressful for the animal. And what we've seen recently, especially with global warming, climate change, because the water temperatures have been increasing, I think last year was the hottest sea surface temperatures on record, if I'm not mistaken. So everything grows quicker, the lice, the algae, the jellyfish. So there's been more and more treatments in the last year. So of course, the more treatments you have, the more stress you cause on the animal, the more skin problems you get. So I think that's been part of the reason. And the other thing, also thinking about invertebrates, we're also seeing more and more awareness on shrimp, for example. So when it comes to eye stalk ablation, there's more and more awareness with consumers, I think, that maybe this isn't the best method for reproducing the shrimp, for example. And indeed, I think it's Albert Heijn, the supermarket in the Netherlands. They've actually started having shrimp in their supermarkets, which are not having the ablated shrimp. So I think even in the invertebrates, this welfare topic has been coming. And of course, in the UK, it's been there for quite a while with the invertebrates, with the lobsters, for example, and with the cephalopods. So I think, again, whether it's a vertebrate or a vertebrate, now these welfare topics have become much, much more important.
Mm-hmm. Talking about welfare a little bit more, so far, most treatment, or really all treatment, has always been therapeutic, right? We attack after the fact.
Yeah.
We now have new tools with biomarker analysis. We're basically taking blood work, which also been done for humans for decades now, to animals. For you as an ingredient company, as somebody who's looking at efficacy, as how it moves through digestion, through internal organs, do biomarkers present an interesting tool?
Absolutely. So in dsm-firmenich, for example, there's actually one of our services called Verax. So it was actually developed for broilers, actually, for predicting coccidiosis, actually. So again, instead of the birds getting sick, you can pick up on these different biomarkers and then make an intervention to prevent that from happening. This is something that's being rolled out and developed in other species. Honestly speaking, we're a little bit behind the curve in aquaculture for a few different reasons. If you imagine there's a cage of salmon, for example, in this one cage you have 50,000, 100,000 fish. and you probably have 6, 8, 12 cages per farm, multiple farms. How do you make sure you get this represented sample of the animals? And the second challenge that we have is when you take 2 fish, you can have a huge variability, natural variability actually, between 2 fish. So taking that data and then interpreting it is challenging. That's not to say we haven't been trying, and we are making progress, but it's taking a little bit longer in aquaculture. And of course, it's even more extreme in shrimp, where you have a huge number of animals and things like this. But we are working with different tools, with different partners to look at different technologies that are available, because like you say, we have to go from a reactive kind of way of treating disease to a proactive way of treating disease. And then, like you say, with our ingredients, you can have different kind of regimes. So you have the prevention, you have the intervention, and then maybe, with an open question mark, reactive therapy. But we like to operate in we always think prevention is always better than cure. Of course it is.
What for customers, for interested farmers that might not have looked into that so much so far, what are the benefits if you can work preventively, and what are the tools they can use to work preventively?
The benefit is simple. It's they get extra money. So let's go back to shrimp. The biggest cost is crop failure. So if all of your shrimp are sick, they're not going to be eating. So then you cannot treat them. And if you lose your stock, you lose your money. All of your money is in that pond. So it has to be better to prevent the disease, for example. And if you look at a lot of these diseases, whether it's EHP, whether it's white spot, whether it's Vibrio, these kind of pathogens are always present in the environment, that they're part of the natural kind of community in the pond. So because they're always there, it means that we always need to kind of have that in the back of our minds when we're thinking about the disease, because it just takes a very quick amount of time for them to kind of switch their mechanism. They're just there doing nothing. Suddenly something happens, it rains, or the temperature changes, the shrimp becomes sick or challenged. Suddenly they will become much more virulent. So again, it's about that prevention. The challenge, of course, is convincing the customers that they need to invest in a kind of a proactive health management, because of course it does come with an initial cost. But the way we always approach this is better to have an initial cost, a little bit of extra cost, $5, $6 per ton of feed or something like that, but you get more animals at the end of it. You get bigger animals. So yes, your costs increase a little bit, but you have a much bigger return on investment. And that's what's really key, return on investment and value as opposed to cost. But it's not always straightforward, as you can imagine.
You mentioned feed. That's a good one to move on to. We heard from Brett Glencross this morning, who had some very impressive facts and very in-depth statistics to share. I noted something very interesting around how much marine ingredients aquaculture has been using, because the share of marine ingredients over time has been continuously falling, while aquaculture has been growing hugely compared to fisheries, which remain stagnant.
Yeah.
Now, if we follow this equation, and if we say aquaculture will continue to grow, we either need new marine ingredients, or we either need to start including more marine ingredients, or we need to start finding alternative ingredients. Now, from your perspective, what are these most promising alternative ingredients, especially around fish meal, fish oil replacements, around proteins?
Yep. Firstly, it's always fascinating talking to Brett. We know him very well, and I always learn something. Brett said something, a couple of things really stand out from Brett's presentation. Firstly, thinking about fish meal itself, he mentioned that actually a lot of the fish meal now, I can't remember the exact statistic, but it's coming from offcuts, for example. So if you fillet your salmon, or you take the waste, let's say, from your oily fish, actually that is going back around into the fish meal. So actually the bigger aquaculture becomes, to a certain extent, the more it's self-fueling a little bit. So I think that will definitely help. Whether it closes the gap, I'm not the expert here. But he also said there's also no perfect ingredient, So I think as a formulator, as a nutritionist, as a feed company, the more options you have, the better. And of course, every ingredient has its advantages, but it also has its limitations, its disadvantages. So I think the bigger that we can make this raw material basket, the better. And then as a formulator, you can choose, okay, am I going to choose this ingredient because of the digestibility? Am I going to choose this ingredient because of sustainability? Am I going to choose this ingredient because of cost? So the more options you have, the more you can play with these kind of parameters. When it comes to new ingredients, of course, there's a number of different candidates and novel ingredients, I think. So as a company, we are working with a single cell protein. We call it smart protein. And this is coming from single cell proteins, like I say. It's part of a much bigger project actually within the company. And over the last couple of years, it's about improving the fermentation of these strains that we're using, increasing the crude protein content. So now we're on around 69% protein. But of course, as Brett said, it's not really about the protein, it's about the nutrients, right? So again, trying to get a better profile of amino acids, and at the same time being kind of running some in vivo trials to see how it benchmarks against maybe some other standard ingredients. So as a company, we're pushing the single cell protein, but like I say, I think the more options we have as an industry, the better.
Mm-hmm. There's been some really interesting developments out there, especially on the level of fermentations.
Mm-hmm.
Some people working on creating protein out of fermenting saw offcuts,
Okay.
food rests.
Yeah.
Really, like anything is quite fascinating what protein can be made out of. From your customers' perspective,
Mm-hmm.
do you know of anything that they are looking seriously into, that they are keen in developing, or are there some just reality roadblocks to some of the dreams that are pursued by some of the startups out there?
Yeah, like you say, there's a number of different ways of creating this protein. I think we always talk about this circular economy, right? So if we can take a waste product from one industry and convert it to something useful in another industry, I think that's good for us. It's good for the planet. It's good for everybody. When it comes to what the customers are asking for, to be honest, I can't recollect a single conversation where they've said, I want this ingredient specifically. They tell us what they need. For example, they're looking for price, they're looking for digestibility, they're looking for scalability, they're looking for price security actually. So even if it's a little bit more expensive, actually it being a little bit more expensive but stable is better than, kind of being cheaper sometime and more expensive sometime is much better for the planning. So rather than saying a customer telling us we want this ingredient, they're saying, look, these are the things we need in an ingredient. What options are there? And I think again, having these different options, especially local ingredients as well, is also very important.
Yeah.
But I can't think of a single ingredient and say I want that ingredient.
Mm-hmm. Local ingredients is a very good point, because we're living in a world now that has or faces a little bit more disrupted supply chains than maybe a few years ago.
Sure.
Considering how our industry is very global, and that a large part of the industry relies on actually fairly few producers of fish
Mm-hmm.
meal, fish oil, what are local possibilities to feather this, for instance, for an industry that is, like salmon, located in very specific places, but potentially far away from where feed, meal, and oil is actually produced?
Yeah, I think this is always going to be the challenge, right? Like I say, with these kind of geopolitical challenges, actually becoming self-sustaining is a big challenge for many things like food security, the energy security, and I know coming from the UK, we are talking a lot about this. In reality, I think there's always going to be some kind of international trade and things like this, which is why I think it's really important to kind of form these partnerships, have these collaborations and things like this right from the beginning. So you have that history, you have that trust and things like that. How it works on a country by country level. Happily, I'm not in the global politics. I definitely wouldn't want to be doing that. But I think that trust, the collaboration, the partnerships are very important, whether it's between companies and countries. Because like you say, realistically, where you're producing salmon, you're probably not going to be producing much soy, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to really get this balance.
Mm-hmm. Do you see any efforts on a customer level to build local resilience?
I think so, because like say for example, like an ingredient company like DSM, for example, typically what we would do, like for a premix, for example, we would be going, in the past it would be like month by month or something like this, or it'd be spontaneous orders. Now we're talking about, okay, quarters, or we're talking about half years or full years and things like this. And again, if you look at our friends in Veramaris, for example, again, I'm not the expert here, I can't talk on their behalf, but I know they're making very long-term agreements with certain feed companies. Again, so the feed company can secure that raw material, but again, it gives the supplier the opportunity to have those contracts in advance, so it gives them a bit of security, which of course is always good for investment, for scale up, which is something of course Veramaris is looking to do, for example. So I think these kind of long-term agreements, they benefit the user of that material, and of course it benefits the supplier. The issue is when you see these kind of price fluctuations, especially with vitamins, for example, it's very, very difficult to predict what the vitamin price might be in 12 months' time, or I guess it's the same for the materials. So you have to make this balance as well, yeah.
Build a certain degree of redundancy into the system, make sure you have a
Exactly.
basket you can select
Yeah,
from.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah,
And of course, like sometimes whether you're a supplier or a customer, sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. But if you have this long-term collaboration, again, like if you look at the norm, I think it's a win-win situation. Sometimes you're this side of the line, sometimes you're this side of the line.
What's the trend in the ingredients basket from the DSM perspective right now? Do you see it rather becoming more diversified, growing, more options, or is it a bit more consolidating around quality standards?
When it comes to macro ingredients or micro?
Both.
Because I think for macro, honestly speaking, we're probably talking about the same kind of materials we were talking about last year and things like this, or 2 years ago actually. I don't think there's that many new macro ingredients coming. There's different kind of processes and things like this to make it more or less digestible. I think there's a lot more competitors in the micronutrient space, and when it comes especially the feed additives, because again, as the industry is challenged, there's more and more people coming up with potential solutions and things like this. And again, as an international company, we like to, we pride ourselves on the science and things like this. And there's always a lot of people that kind of jump on that bandwagon and things like this. It's very easy to make a probiotic, for example. But as Abong said in his presentation today, actually, there's many fake products on the market. So they will actually utilize other people's science, other people's expertise, come up with a very, very cheap solution, but sell it for cheaper and actually be quite successful in the short term. So the micro ingredient space, the feed additive space is hugely competitive. And let's not even think about China, where they can reverse your deconstruct your technology, do a very, very similar thing at half the cost. So this is something that we also challenged with, but yeah, extremely competitive in the micro ingredient space.
Okay, considering that basically on the R&D level, there is it's a bit of a numbers game. You know what parameters you need to arrive in, and then it really comes down to material science to a certain degree, right? Now we have new tools in the form of AI, in the form of very quick big data analysis. Is there an initiative you know about or you can talk about where internally DSM might be combining what you know, what you have, to basically just start iterating on a lot more ingredients a lot quicker?
Yes, so of course as a company we're always following the 3R principle, right? So we're reducing, then we're replacing, and we are, what's the third R? I can't remember what this is, but there's 3R. But basically we're taking the data that we do have, and again we're trying to use models exactly like Brett said. You cannot test every ingredient in every scenario for every species, especially when you think about the diversity of the aquaculture industry. So it is about using this kind of artificial intelligence, this machine learning, these models and things like that. So then you can plug these different parameters in. Again, I have to be honest, I'm not an expert on this. We have much smarter people in this space. Actually, we're collaborating with companies like Manolin, for example, the companies that know about the tech, but also know about the industry as well, and trying to bridge these gaps. So, for example, something we've talked about, making a link, for example, between plant materials and pigmentation, for example. So, as Louise explained in her talk today, astaxanthin in the feed has been increasing, but actually the color has been coming down. So we have to think, well, why is this? So one of our theories is, of course, when you pull out the main ingredients, you're increasing the plant ingredients. So potentially you're increasing the anti-inflammatory, anti-nutrients, or some mycotoxins and things like this. So we're also working with companies like Manolin to try and make this kind of connection, this cause effect. Of course, it's not always this simple, but of course, as technology moves forwards, of course, we will try and utilize as many different tools as possible. And of course, don't forget, it's also cheaper and quicker as well. Running an in vivo salmon trial will take 200,000 euros, maybe 6 to 12 months. So utilizing these tools is no doubt cheaper and quicker as well. So from a resource efficiency perspective, it's much, much better.
We've just been through a really, really fun week here in Athens at the Aqua Days. Well done moderating, by the way. I know you had a long day.
It's a fun job. I like doing it.
Yeah, no, you do it very well. I was wondering, like, because you've spoken to everybody, you know everybody, what are the reoccurring themes you're picking up from your guests and customers?
Yeah, so I think one thing, especially with events like this, it's about collaboration. Every person in that room has a specific expertise, has a specific role to play in the value chain in creating that sustainable, that affordable protein. But we cannot do everything on our own. We have to work together. So I think when people come to our event like this, having the sharing of informations and this willingness to collaborate and open up, actually, which isn't always easy, especially if you're in the feed business. So I think that's really really nice. And the other thing I like about these kind of global events, and this is where I think as a company, DSM has a strong competitive advantage, and one of the reasons I love my role is because you have this kind of global overview. So for example, if you're a shrimp producer in Indonesia, you're looking at Ecuador and you think, wow, they're growing again this year. I think 15%, Gorian said already. How are they doing this? So again, it's about having that communication, that sharing of best practice, and think, okay, if they're doing this, maybe it's going to work for me. So they can try something new and maybe succeed. Or the opposite, if something's not working, then they will also find this out. But again, that's a core theme: collaboration. Sustainability is always a kind of a core theme, but again, depending on who you're talking to, what part of the world you are, what species you're working in, it depends on where it goes on the priority list. So again, not naming names or species, it might be a high priority for one select customer for a species, and then it's important for another customer, but of course there's maybe a higher priorities on that one. So again, it's interesting to see from a company perspective, we're always talking about sustainability, and of course that's core to what we do. That's really deep in our hearts. But we also have to think of our customers as well. If it's not their priority, we have to try and help them on what their objective is as well. So it's also interesting for us to share knowledge with them, but also us to get knowledge back from them. What are their pain points? Where do they need help? How can we help? And things like this.
Great. So if we speak again, when we speak again,
Yeah, for sure.
In 2 years' time, maybe quicker next time, but if we'd say we speak again in 2 years' time, what are the success stories and what are the developments you would like to tell me about then? What do you want to have happened?
So I think one of the, something I didn't mention earlier actually, but I think a really exciting development for us, and I think you will talk to one of our colleagues, Seb, earlier. So we've just got the EFSA positive opinion for high D, which is a 25 hydroxy D3, so a much higher bioavailable form of vitamin D3. So this was actually published just last week, actually. But of course, there's always a lag between having the published opinion and then obviously going onto the market. So we're hoping in around 6 to 9 months, maybe this will be finally approved and available for sale. So hopefully when we talk in 2 years, let's say 2 years, this will have gone through its final steps and it will be actually being implemented in the industry. Because I think this kind of ingredient in Europe, for example, can have a huge positive impact on sustainability. So for example, in our trials, we know that it's consistently improving growth in salmon 10, 12% consistently. It's also helping with wound healing. And like we say, skin health is a really important topic. It's also helping with heart health, bigger, stronger hearts. And we know in salmon industry, CMS, for example, is a big problem. So it's ticking a lot of boxes. The industry is calling out for it. It needs it by yesterday, So hopefully when we talk, we will have some really good developments on this from a sales perspective, but of course also from a sustainability perspective.
Okay, great. Any final words? Any final
No,
promises or outlooks?
I've learned from my mistakes. I don't like to make promises and things like this if I know I can't keep them.
Yeah, we won't.
But of course, DSM is always open to making collaborations, making partnerships. We also accept we have a lot of capabilities. We have lots of products and things like this. But like I said, we also can't do anything alone. So making these partnerships, these long-term partnerships, like you said, is extremely important for us and our business as well. So we're always trying to find solutions to the industry's problems. And you'll always have a partner in dsm-firmenich.
Great, yeah. It's our great pleasure to be your partner in this.
Absolutely.
It's been great.
Yeah,
Ben,
for sure.
thank you so much for
Thank
your
you so
time.
much. Have a good day.
You too, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
Thanks.